Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for coming to this next session. It is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Piper Thunstrom. She is a longtime member of the Python community. You might have seen her in a lot of Python conferences, giving talks. She is also one of the maintainer of PPB Pursuit PyBear, which is a game engine based in Python. And she recently also started co-founded Tea House Hosting, which is a platform for static web hosting. So check it out. But today she is with us to give a talk with the title "Fall in Love with CSS." Let's give her a big round of applause.
Awesome. Perfect transition there. That's great. So just to make sure that everyone's expectations are set. This is really the basics of CSS plus some of the new features of the last 10 or 15 years. Don't worry about which ones I'm going over. You'll get to find out in a bit. So this one's me. You can find me on the web. PA-Thunstrom at ngmx.com is my Fetty handle. I'm pa-thunstrom.bsky.app on Blue Sky. My website is piperthunstrom.dev. As I was introduced, I am half of Tea House Hosting. This is the link to that. We are trying to make a simpler web for everyone. You can check it out at teahouse.cafe. And the last website I'm going to give you is stealthiswebsite.art. This is I like calling it a brutalist web design project. You get to steal pre-built layouts with commentary for building your own website. And with that, we're going to get into why am I giving a CSS talk at PyCon? So my history with web development is going to sound familiar to a lot of folks. My first website was a GeoCities website. From there, I was a regular in the Neopets forum, so all of the signature banner tricks was stuff I was doing. I was also on LiveJournal. But if I said that this is my origin story, I'd be overselling the skills I actually got. I actually started freelancing as a web developer in 2014. Around that time, mobile-first development was kind of the big buzzword as I was getting into this. And of course, everyone at the time was like, hey, you should go try this thing called Bootstrap. I tried building a couple of websites in Bootstrap. I could follow the easy tutorials, that was fine, but as soon as I wanted it to do something that wasn't in those tutorials, it broke consistently. Usually, I was forgetting some random div that Bootstrap required. Basically, I describe it as my brain and the model Bootstrap expects fought with each other constantly. So I got really frustrated and decided, okay, I know that it's called responsive web design. I'm going to go and actually learn how this works. Over the next couple of weeks, I found some online courses. I started learning CSS from first principles. Most of my, flexbox existed, but many of my tutorials were telling me to use floats. So I remember float layout. Thankfully, I did not live through the table layout era. So after I'd done all this learning, I built like half a dozen new layouts in about a month. I got to ship one of them for one of my clients. It was great. No Bootstrap, just a much stronger understanding of the fundamentals. And that's where my obsession started. We're going to stop for a second because I want to talk about contempt culture. The original blog post where it was coined is about 10 years old now. We in the Python community kind of experience this more often than we probably should. If you've ever heard, Python is just a learning language. You know the kinds of thing I'm talking about. Similarly, you get things like, no one likes JavaScript. CSS is my passion, if anyone knows the joke that I'm mentioning. This is an extremely pernicious culture that much of tech has. And when I say pernicious, I'm actually going to quote Oren on this. I was taught to be contemptuous of the non-blessed narratives, and I was taught to pay for my continued access to the technical communities through perpetuating that contempt. So I do encourage you to go and check out the blog post that's at the bottom of this slide. The reason I bring this up is because CSS is often a victim of contempt from the very people who use it the most. We've all seen the jokes. I made reference to one just a moment ago. I'm not going to make these jokes. I think CSS is good, and CSS keeps getting better. All right, now let's talk about declarative languages. The one that many of us will probably be familiar with is SQL. The cool thing about declarative languages is you tell the computer what you want, and it figures out the best way to make it happen. What I like about declarative languages is the rules that turn the declarations into the actual code that runs are all very learnable and very understandable. And so this is the context I want you to think about CSS. It is a declarative language to tell you what the website should look like. Next principle that you need to understand, CSS operates on documents. This is a basic HTML document. If you've done any amount of web design, you've probably seen one before. The basic building block of documents are called elements. We are focusing on the visual elements, so basically everything HTML, body, and down. The stuff that happens up in the head doesn't typically get shown, so we're going to ignore it. There are two broad categories of elements with a couple of exceptions. You have block elements. These are typically two-dimensional. They take up space along the block axis, which in English is from the top to the bottom of the page. This is only true in English websites. Oh, it's not just English websites, but it is. There are other writing systems that use different directions. We actually have tools now for declaring these sorts of relationships based on your writing system. The generic block element is a div. I'm only naming this because it is useful to know what the most basic version of a thing is. We mostly try to avoid divs in the modern web development. The second type of element is inline elements. These are, we call them single dimensional. That's a little wrong. Basically, they work like text. They go from left to right, and they can wrap on the page. They take up space in what we call the inline direction. That would be left to right in English. The most generic inline element is the span, and our EM in this example is also an inline element. I did mention semantic elements, but I'm going to reiterate. We like the semantic web. I cannot cover it on this stage because that's basically 2 or 3 talks of its own. You're going to get a theme of that. I have a lot of topics that I'm going to give you what I can and encourage you to go look further. All right, so now we're going to talk about the building blocks of CSS. The basic building block is called a rule set. And we're going to start with the very innermost part, highlighted in yellow here. These are called properties. A property is made up of a name, a colon to separate it, and a value or values, and then ended with a semicolon. I'm not going to be able to cover all of the properties. I have various examples throughout the slides. There are, in fact, over 200 CSS properties in modern CSS. It's a lot of reading. When it comes to values, they can be single values, or in the example here with a font family, you can list multiple font names. This actually has 2 different kind of values, but is a list of similar types. And then there are shorthand rules that can collect many values of many types to do a lot of things at once. The next step up is the CSS block. That is everything between the curly braces. Basically, we surround it by curly braces, and we can put a whole bunch of properties into one rule. You are also allowed to have empty blocks. You could just not have anything here. It's not very useful, but it is sometimes useful for planning out your CSS. If for any reason in a block, if a property is invalid, wrong type in the type field, wrong property name, forgot a semicolon, and you actually have one property made up of 2 properties, CSS does this thing where it will ignore anything that is invalid and apply all the other properties in the rule set if it's being applied. All right, selectors. We're going to go over a lot of these things. So the selector is how we actually tell CSS what elements we actually care about. They're broken up into a handful of categories. Our first one is called basic selectors. Everything on this slide is a basic selector. The top two, the P and the HTML, are what are called type selectors. They are basically associated with the names of elements. Classes reference the class attribute in HTML. We denote these in CSS by prepending the period here. The final example here is an ID reference. That is a direct reference to an ID attribute in your HTML. They are always prepended with an octothorpe like this. Yeah, so there's our basic selectors. The next step up, we get into compound and complex selectors. Compound selectors are pretty simple. You take any number of basic selectors and you combine them. So p.important is a paragraph element with an important class on it. Or in this case, our second example is also a compound. That is a nav with a main nav ID. That's pretty much all it takes to understand compound selectors. Complex selectors are compound or basic selectors combined with what are called combinators. The most common one you're going to see in your CSS is the descendant operator. It is not a descendant operator, or it is not an operator as we are used to. The space is the descendant operator. It's a little weird to wrap your head around the first time. It basically targets any element that matches the second, the thing after the space has to be a descendant of what's before the space. There are other combinators that let you say things like direct descendant, which is shown. We also have siblings, next siblings, and columns, which I was not able to do enough research on exactly how that works, so I'm not going to explain it here, but know that that is another option. All right, attribute selectors. These are actually really cool. So when you get the square bracket notation, that first name is going to be an attribute in your HTML. In this example, we're looking at the type attribute that is on many kinds of inputs. If you put an equal sign after it, you can actually check for specific values of attributes. So in this case, we are only looking at submit inputs. There are other ways to express this, but this is a very cool kind of format. You can combine this with other kinds of selectors. You can put a element type in front of it and then also look at the attributes. Just don't put a space between them. All right, pseudo elements, pseudo classes. Pseudo elements always prepended with 2 colons like this after. Pseudo elements are a programmatic way to either select you can select things that are attached to like browser features, like the new fragment API. They're called text fragments. Or you can do things like before and after, which are actually creating elements in the page from the CSS. After actually makes the last child of whatever element it's on a inline element, and then it puts whatever's in this content tag into that element. Pseudo classes most often let you interact with the elements based on their state. This one, like focus, is when an element has focus, it might do something different. The big catch is if, oh, right, and the very last one, I don't have an example for you, but you can also give a selector list. Basically, any of the things that we just talked about, if you put commas between them, you can have a list of selectors. It's basically an OR for the rule set. The catch is if any selector in the list is invalid, it will invalidate your entire rule set. So where an invalid property only stops the property, an invalid selector stops everything in the rule. All right, next step, we need to understand the cascade. This is kind of the thing that catches most newbies. The short version, the cascade is the set of rules that determine which rule sets get priority. The very first step of the cascade is relevance. Basically, does the selector actually match the given element? If it doesn't, we ignore the rule set entirely for that element. If it does, we can continue into the rest of the cascade. The next step in evaluating the cascade is called the origin. There's 3 origins. The one your CSS fits into is called the author styles. The author is the person writing the style sheets for the website that is being viewed. The next origin is the user agent. In web development parlance, the user agent is your browser. If you've ever put together a website without any styles at all, you know that like somewhat ugly, just like stacked text in a bad font, yeah, that's the user agent's sheet. The last origin is the user, which used to be a way for users to modify pages to be more accessible to themselves. Most browsers don't support these by default anymore, though I did find out this weekend that Safari does support user style sheets, which is kind of cool. When it comes to priority, it's the way I've shown on this slide. Author sheet has highest priority, user has middle, user agent has the least. There is also a concept called layers, which I don't really have time to go into, but layers are a way for you, the author, to define the priority rules inside your own CSS. They all live in the author origin, so that is how they fit into this part of the cascade. Specificity is the next major thing you need to know. Every rule set has a specificity based on the things that make up the selector. The spec calls them columns, but you can think of them as a 3-tuple. The first column, 0 index, is the ID column. Every ID you see in your selector increments the column by 1. The second column is classes. That's going to be classes, pseudo-classes, and the attribute selectors I just talked about. The final column is the type column, and that's going to be every element name and pseudo-element. This link is specificity. It is an absolutely delightful comic that explains this concept via fish. When comparing specificity, you compare element-wise, with the earlier column is taken priority. So if there is a higher number in the ID column, then that's the one. If those match, then you check class, and then you check element. You can calculate this for just about any rule with just a little bit of effort. I will note for combinators that the combinators themselves don't tend to influence specificity, but the elements that make up the complex rule do affect specificity. So a direct child is more specific because it has 2 values in it, is essentially how that works. All right, dash important, everyone knows about it. Please don't. If you do, it basically flips the priority list. That's not entirely true. There's a couple of things that are inserted between important and unimportant. But it does flip the priority. So the user agent becomes the most important rules. The author becomes the least important of the important rules. And I'm going to quote MDN on this one. Instead of using important, consider using cascade layers and using low-weight specificity throughout your CSS so that styles are easily overridden with slightly more specific rules. Using semantic HTML helps provide anchors from which to apply your styling. All right, cool. That's the basics. That is what you need to understand to write your CSS. Now let's talk about the new and the cool for certain values of new. We're going to start with media queries. These are one of the older things on this list. Basically, media queries are at rules, which is a special syntax that lets you do really a lot of things, but it mostly groups rules against things that aren't normally part of a rule set's expectations. The top is actually a valid media query. You declare what kind of media you care about, which is going to be print or screen, and then the optional query after the and can be a capability or condition of the page. I have a list of useful ones here, min width, max width, depending on if you're doing mobile first or its opposite. Prefers color scheme, lets you determine what color scheme the user wants so you can display the right one. And prefers reduce motion reduce for folks who need fewer animations. The root rule. All right, so this is a pseudo class. It used to be, before this existed, if you wanted things like colors that were inheritable or other inheritable properties, you would have to put it on the HTML or the body specifically. And you can still do that. That puts you at a 001 specificity. The root pseudo class basically targets whatever the root element in the page, which is almost HTML, always HTML, but it has the 010 specificity, so you get a little bit more stickiness to the rules in the root. This is extremely useful for the first topic in our replaces a CSS preprocessor set of features, custom properties. Typically, people call these CSS variables. The official name is custom properties. Custom properties are any property prepended with 2 hyphens. The name of the property can be basically anything you want. The value can also be any CSS value. They are inheritable, so any descendant will use the value of the closest ancestor where it's set. A good place to put your defaults is actually your default custom properties is in that root element we just talked about. So to access the value, you actually use the CSS function var and give it the full name of your property, not as a string, as you can see here. You can also nest these calls in things like calc. So if you can do a calc call and with multiple vars to do math on these things, for example. The other useful feature that used to be available to CSS processors is nested CSS. It's now standards compliant. We call the outer rule set the parent rule and the inner set the children rules. Children selectors are combined with the parent selectors to produce the effective combination of the rules. So for our first rule here, the EM targets EMs that are descendants of P. The implicit case like this is putting that space descendant operator between them. We can also use the nesting selector, that's this ampersand, to make it more explicit about the relationship between the 2 rules. The second example uses the nesting selector to create a compound selector of P with a class of importance. And the final trick is that we can also target elements that are children of other elements. This syntax at the bottom targets paragraphs that are descendants of articles. As you can see, we've just moved the ampersand to the end of the rule. All right, better colors. So this is going to wrap up all of those features we just talked about. First thing, we have the color scheme property. You set your color scheme on usually the root of your website. It tells the browser what color schemes you care about. The values are only light and dark, and you can combine them in different ways. Typically, you're going to want to declare dark light or light dark. The one that comes first is communicated to the browser as the one you want first. It is your preference versus the user's preference. If you only provide color scheme light dark but no color information, the browser will automatically start supporting dark mode for you. It will just use whatever the user agent sheet does for dark mode. Once you've done this, you now have access to the light dark function. So this color light dark black white, this basically you can do light and dark mode without a media query using this syntax. And it also puts both color modes right next to each other in your CSS, so you know you've covered both of your bases. All right. Combining custom properties and the light dark function lets you do something really cool. So remember that custom properties inherit. So if you write our CSS like this, in the root, we have declared color scheme light dark, and then we describe a primary color and a contrast color. Then we use the universal selector, which is this asterisk, which means every element on the page. And we set color and background color to our primary and contrast and vice versa. Then if you want to change the color scheme for a portion of your page, for example, if we give a special class to a part of the subtree, we can then redeclare our CSS custom properties and get the new color scheme. I will say, if you do the color and background color in the root, it only gets evaluated the one time, so you do have to split it up like this if you want to do this trick. All right, quick flurry of features. The new CSS color standards introduce more color gamuts. OKLCH and OKLab are both really cool color gamuts that basically some distance in the gamut's field is perceptually equivalent to humans, is the best way to explain this. OKLab is the full one. It's got a very weird shape, so if you've never touched it before, it can be hard to wrap your head around. OKLCH basically maps that down to a space that is very similar to HSL. Oh, and finally, we get this color from syntax, HSL from red, where H is equivalent to the hue value from our original color. S is from the saturation and then the lightness. And as you can see, I can do calculations on those values, or I can just replace them entirely with my own values. All right, CSS layout. This is like the cool stuff. Let's see if I can get through it. We've gotten two really cool layout tools that support many popular kinds of layouts. You get to forget the woes of floats and clears, and you also get to avoid table layouts, but keep all of that control. So here's Flexbox. Flexbox is the one-dimensional layout tool. It basically treats its children kind of like text. You turn it on with display flex on the container. Then you pick a direction. Columns follow the block axis, and rows follow the inline axis. The opposite gets called the cross axis, but needs no special property. You can also reverse them with an X-reverse syntax, so column reversed. Then you have access to justify and align properties. Justification is along the main axis. You have your usual suspects, start, end, center. The two that I really like are space between and space around. They basically divvy up any remaining space in the flex to the spaces between the items, or it includes the start and the end of the row as well with space around. Align content. This is the this is similar to justify content, except it is when you have multiple rows in your flex, how those take up the flex space. Align items center. This is going to be that like wonderful answer that everyone has, or answer to the question everyone has, how do I center text in an object? Align items is basically how each of the children is aligned across the cross axis. In the cross axis, but it's per line, not across lines. And then we have flex wrap wrap. Unless you have a fixed size flexbox, you probably want flex wrap wrap. I have worked on card layouts that I have forgotten it and wondered why all my cards are just trying to squeeze into one line. All right, grid. Grid has a lot more to go, and I have very little time, so we're going to see what we can do here. Turn it on with display grid. Then you need three things on your grid container. You need grid template rows, grid template columns, and grid template areas. You don't actually need areas, but I'm going to suggest that you use them. They make it a lot easier to understand. This example is, in fact, kind of your like basic blog layout. There is a, if you look at the rows, I have three columns. One is 1/5 of the space, one is 3/5 of the space, and one is 1/5 of the space. And then when you look at, I have this backwards, in fact. The thing that says rows should be the columns. And the column should be rows, and we have a 10 viewport height header. We have the main body that takes up the rest of the space, and then we have a 10 viewpoint height footer. So if you've ever seen the blog that's got just the banners on the top and then a column down the middle and then maybe something in the sides, that's this layout. I then named the areas, so you can see the three headers, left, main, and right, and then footer, footer, footer. The rule for grid template areas is they must be contiguous rectangles without overlap. The names are arbitrary. I've typed them out like this. A lot of times when I see these, they'll be reduced down to like one letter. All right, then on the children of your grid, you can describe a grid area. This references those names that we just did in the grid template areas. And then the last bit, so if you start with like a mobile first philosophy, you've got a You just let them stack as normal. In your first breakpoint, you turn on grid, give it columns, give it rows. In this case, I've decided to do a 2-column at 450 pixels. And then each of the areas will take up the areas in this grid. And then at your higher breakpoints, when you want to go to 3, the only thing you need to redefine is the grid template columns and the grid template areas. I am out of time. Has, is, where, and not are very cool. And here is a pile of link bags for various things. Steal this website that I mentioned before, Flexbox Froggy, which is a tool to learn Flexbox, CSS Grid Garden, which is a game for teaching grid, and of course, the web CSS documentation is going to be your best friend.
Thank you so much, Piper, for the great presentation. Does anybody have any questions? Go ahead.
Just did a speed run of like 20 years of CSS development, and that's fun. I know a lot about CSS, and I'm not here to quiz you. I just want to ask you, what is your favorite property or favorite shorthand or favorite new convenience? I should also say, CSS has moved rapidly in the last 10 years. There's 1,000 things you can do. We should all avoid frameworks. We should use less. We should write faster code, etc. You've definitely just mentioned some of the coolest new stuff.
Yes.
So tell us what we should be excited about.
I actually think that this model that I showed for grid is actually like my favorite thing that I figured out in the last few years. It allows you to do really responsive websites with very, very little effort on your part. And so like getting grid into your head so that you can do your layouts the way you want, that's the tool that you should go figure out.
Also, quickly want to say, I think it's also really incredible to show your passion for this stuff. I know we tend to all be very back-end oriented people at a Python conference, but I do think it's important that we display our data, and I think that when you get to see how easy it is to play with these things, and the syntax is simple, that's on purpose. It gets way harder. You can write really advanced math and stuff inside CSS. You can break the rules, but you showed a really good way of making it simple, so thank you.
Thank you. All right.
A round of applause for Piper. Thank you.